Today I'm going to be making burgers and making the burger buns from scratch as well. It's a really simple burger recipe. It's from Shake Shack and it's really straightforward. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. And the burger buns are pretty straightforward too, especially as I use my bread machine to kind of make the dough. That's what I'm going to be doing right now. It's a slightly enriched dough. I quite like my burger buns to be soft. It's not, I think it's got an egg but no milk. Enriched dough often has both of those in it and it's just got the egg. But when I've made them before, they've been really lovely and soft, which is perfect for burgers, I think. And I use my bread machine to make it. I'm going to be using this plastic bag. This came with a delivery last week, and because it's so huge I kind of thought it might be a really good proofing bag, like a reusable proofing bag, so that I'm not using cling film and kind of throwing it away every time. So I washed that inside and out and I'm going to try using it as a proofing bag today. So first step is to get the machine to mix up the dough for me. That'll take 45 minutes. In that time I've got to run to the post office and do some work, but then I'll come back, shape the buns, leave them to proof for an hour, bake them, and then I'll do the burgers just almost at the time we're ready to eat. The recipe is for plain flour. I have strong bread flour and I have double O, which are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how much kind of protein they have and how strong they are. So I'm going to do a little mixture of the two. This recipe makes 8 large burger buns. I don't know if I've ever made the full quantity before. I've probably halved it in the past. It calls for 1/4 of a cup of sugar. That just seems like so much to me. Like I'm not going to use quite that much. But that's something you can do in cooking, is just kind of go with your gut, especially if you've made something before and you know that you probably don't need quite that much sugar. Yeah, it's got butter and egg, this dough recipe, no milk. So it's kind of, oh, someone's at the door. In terms of what order you put ingredients into the bucket for the bread machine, the instructions do kind of give you a suggested order, which is usually yeast first, then flour, and then everything else. The only thing that really makes a difference is you want to try and keep salt away from yeast initially. So I usually either do what they suggest, which is yeast first, flour, and then everything on the top, or if I've done the flour first, I'll kind of make a little well for the yeast, put it in and cover it over before I add the other ingredients. Just because salt kind of inhibits the way that yeast works, so you don't want it to have too much contact early on before it's all properly mixed together. Right, that's it. I'm going to go and put this on, go and do my chores and come back for the next stage. Okay, behind me is my dough that's been proving for an hour. I'm now going to cut it into 8 individual little rolls, shape them and put them onto this tray to prove for half an hour before baking. Here they are, all shaped and ready to prove for a little bit inside my proving bag. And then when these are ready, they're going to go in the oven for 12 to 15 minutes, and when they come out they'll be brushed with a little butter, and I may put some sesame seeds on top. I've never really bothered with that before, but I might try today. I've put a couple of things under the plastic so that the plastic doesn't sink down and touch the rolls, but I also use the technique of kind of blowing air into the opening and then quickly sealing it shut with a rubber band, which means that it's kind of full of air. And that seems to have worked really well. The plastic's staying up high and not touching the dough, so I'm going to go and give these a prove now. These have puffed up a lot. The bag's been really good, and I'm about to put them in the oven for 12 to 15. So the buns are in the oven now. I've got some butter here, which I'm going to melt in a minute, and some sesame seeds. And then while those are sort of cooling, I don't need to do anything really with the burgers until right before I'm going to cook them. They won't take very long at all. But there is a kind of Shake Shack burger sauce. In the recipe, they say they're not giving you their real, authentic recipe, but that it's close enough. So I'm going to make that now. It involves ketchup, mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, a little chipotle powder, and some pickle juice. So I'm just going to mix that up so that it's ready. And I might also just slice some cheese and tomato and lettuce and get it all ready for this evening when I make the burgers. So here's how we make the traditional Shake Shack burger sauce. They don't share their actual recipe, but this is their close enough recipe. It's 2 tablespoons of mayo. And you can adjust this a little bit to your own personal tastes. I tend to prefer slightly less mayo and slightly more of the other ingredients. About half a teaspoon of ketchup. About half a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. And half a teaspoon of pickle brine. I know this looks like a maple syrup jar, that's because it is. I just used an empty jar to save some pickle brine from the last time I had some pickles. And the recipe says a pinch of chipotle. I love chipotle, but it is quite hot, so I tend to do it in 2, do a little, taste it, and then come back and possibly add some more. So give that a really good mix. Yeah, a little more ketchup. Definitely some more chipotle. I think I'm good on the mustard. That was the strongest flavour coming through. I'm going in with even more ketchup. The recipe is for almost all mayo and not a lot of ketchup, and I really prefer it probably with equal amounts of each. I could even do some more chipotle, I think. This is a new chipotle powder, so it might be less spicy than the last one I had. It's kind of fun making sauces this way, where you can kind of get used to trying to taste all the individual flavours and how well they balance. Oh yeah, that's much better. Definitely can taste the chipotle, and it's got that lovely pinkish colour of a kind of American burger sauce, so I'm happy with that. I think my dough was slightly stiff. The recipe gives you a little kind of range of quantities of water to add, depending on the season when you make bread, how humid it is in general. You can use less or more water. And I don't think I used quite enough. I thought it was fairly humid today, so I used the lower end of water, and I kind of wish I'd put some more. Yeah, so looking at the buns, I think that they're not quite as soft as I would like. They're a bit kind of like monstrously tall, but maybe that's okay, we'll see. I don't know what that'll be like to eat, but they're not bad at all. I think making bread, people get quite nervous about it, but you can go a fair bit wrong and still have something that's perfectly delicious and edible, so that's always worth bearing in mind. So here are the buns. I'm going to let them cool now and see how they're not quite as soft as I would like. I made sure I stopped cooking them when they were kind of really light coloured, because they already seemed a little hard. But hopefully they'll still be nice. I'll let them cool and see. Oh yes, and going in the other room reminded me, I was going to say, I've turned my plastic bag inside out to make sure that any moisture, it gets kind of moist when you're proving dough inside, so make sure that dries and it doesn't get kind of musty in the bag. So nothing else goes into these burgers except a little salt and pepper and slices of lettuce, cheese and tomato. And I'm also going to be serving with just some oven chips. I'm not going to make the chips, I made the buns, so I'm not going to make chips as well from scratch. This recipe doesn't say that you have to pre-shape your kind of pucks of meat in advance and refrigerate them shaped or anything. You can do that, and probably I won't cook them all today, so I'll get some ready and then leave them in the fridge with a little sheet of greaseproof paper in between each one for future cooking. But yeah, it doesn't say you have to kind of shape in advance and leave them to sit or anything, so I'm just going to be shaping them straight out of the fridge and straight onto the griddle. Sometimes we'll buy those slices of processed cheese for burgers just because it's kind of nice to use, just like dirty burger ingredients. But I don't have any today. I've got this Turkish cheese, which actually I have no idea what it is because I can't read the label on it, but we buy it quite often. It's just a lovely mild kind of cheese that melts well. Okay, gonna make some burger patties. So these spare ones are going in the freezer for a future date. I put a little square of greaseproof paper in between each one, otherwise they can stick together. So the chips are in the oven. The next step is to toast the buns before finally cooking the burgers and assembling. Also going to season the burgers with salt and pepper. And I'm going to be doing a technique that I saw in a video. I can't remember what video it was or when. But when you put the burgers on the griddle, you kind of press them down, and using a spatula for the kind of width of it, you also need something that's not bendy, because this is really bendy, to help you kind of press down. So I've got my two things ready. And I'm also going to be practicing what I've learned about not moving stuff around on the heat for the first few minutes, because again you want it to kind of brown, and if you start moving things around too soon that just doesn't happen at all. So yeah, I think the recipe says leave it for at least 2 minutes without moving, and you try and get a kind of round crispy edge. Another tip is that if you need to encourage your cheese to melt but the burger's kind of almost done, you can always put a lid over it. Today I'm making another batch of buns. When I was editing the footage of making the burger buns, and I was talking about how I kind of like a burger bun to be really soft, and the ones I made were not quite as soft as I would have liked. They were very nice, but I would have just liked them a tiny bit softer. I suddenly remembered, I hadn't done this for ages, but there is this Japanese method, tangzhong, where you can take a little bit of the flour and water before you put it into the dough, kind of cook it, and it is this magical process where you then add it back into the rest of the dough ingredients, make the dough as normal, and it just has an extraordinary effect on the dough. It makes really, really soft bread, and it makes bread that kind of lasts a long time. You can leave it for 3 or 4 days. Doesn't start to go hard like a normal roll would. So I thought that I would try that for the end of the episode so that I can compare these buns to the ones that I've already shown you. So first up, I've pre-measured my flour and water that's going to go into the dough, and I'm now going to take a little bit of each of these. It's going to be 1/4 cup of the water, 1.5 tablespoons of the flour. If you're making a bigger batch of dough, it's probably going to be 1/2 cup of water and 3 tablespoons of flour. And I'm going to kind of heat them here, whisking the whole time until I have what they call a slurry, which is a delightful word, which is just kind of a floury mixture. You then let that cool, add it back into the rest of the flour and water and all the other ingredients that go into the dough, and you just make the rolls as usual. So there we go, there's my slurry. It kind of thickens quite quickly. You can see it happening, and it turns into this kind of tapioca-y type consistency. But it really just takes a couple of minutes. So it's kind of one little short extra step, but it has a really kind of interesting effect on the finished bread. So I'm just going to let this cool slightly and then get on with making my dough. Luckily today it's absolutely freezing in London, so my little slurry there didn't take very long at all to cool down. So it's ready to go into the bread machine basket now. So what I'm adding in is 1/2 teaspoon of yeast, the remainder of the flour that I haven't put into the slurry, the remainder of the water, a little pinch of salt, a teeny bit of sugar, some egg, just under, it's like a small egg, some softened butter, and my beautifully named slurry. So now I can get that going in the machine and then do the rest of the process of the buns, which is 2 sessions of proofing. The first one, once the dough is made, it'll sit for an hour to rise, and then the second proofing I'll shape the buns, and then they'll have a shorter rise, and then they'll go in the oven. So here are my tangzhong buns after shaping. The dough was noticeably softer and easier to kind of form into these little balls of the right shape and size, so I'm hopeful that these will come out beautifully. They're now just going in for another proof, probably, I thought it was half an hour, but the recipe says an hour. I'm going to check on them after half an hour and see what I think. So my buns puffed up nicely, they're ready to go in the oven, and look what just happened to arrive in the post. I've wanted a silicone pastry brush for ages because the one I've been using is an old, it's just really old, and sometimes the bristles come off onto the food. So I'm really happy this has arrived. I can use it to brush these with butter now before they go in the oven. So here are the rolls. I'm just letting them cool before I open one of them up and see what it's like on the inside. But they look pretty good. They're definitely a little flatter than the last ones, which kind of makes me think they will be softer inside. The last one's kind of puffed up so much because they maybe had a bit too much structure. So I'm hoping that these will be, oh look at that, a little softer. So my second set of buns were softer than the first lot. They still weren't quite as pillowy soft as I kind of remembered, having made them in the past using the tangzhong method. And I did wonder whether, I think possibly in the past I'd tried it with milk instead of water in the dough. So yeah, like a fully enriched dough. So that would be definitely something to try if you're trying to achieve a really soft roll. I know it's been quite popular for a while to do sort of brioche type rolls to go with burgers. And I do remember Anthony Bourdain saying that he really didn't like that trend. He said, you know, a burger is quite fatty, especially if you've got cheese and stuff on it, and you don't need a lot of extra fat in the bread as well. You kind of want the bread to be plain to soak up some of the fat of the burger. But I think
especially if you're making like veggie burgers or something, a brioche roll would work really well. And it's certainly something I'm going to try in the future as well.